Hey everybody, my name is Fletcher. I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is January 23rd, 2012. I have a sponsor. I sponsor other men in AA, and I'm grateful to be at a meeting. This is a first for me doing a video chat meeting. I'm kind of proud of myself for figuring it out. I'm not all that tech savvy really, so uh, glad to be here. I'll try and keep it brief. I'm a garden variety alcoholic. Started drinking at maybe 12 years old or so. I don't really know why. I think initially it was just because it looked cool. The older kids look cool in movies, and I was just kind of curious. So I guess I was just experimenting, with drugs and alcohol early on. And then it accelerated pretty quickly. Once I figured out where to get drugs, how to get drugs, alcohol, I became probably a daily weed smoker, definitely a daily weed smoker pretty quickly. And then the heavy drinking followed like a couple years after the daily weed smoking. So by the time I was about 15 or so, everything that was in my life from my parents, that had been instilled in me by my parents and by my school and my extracurricular activities and all that had kind of fallen by the wayside. I was a relatively smart student in school, pretty relatively good athlete, pretty average with school and sports, but was definitely had artistic talent and things like that. And really all that had, kind of been replaced by getting high and getting drunk with my friends, and so right around age 15, I dropped out of high school. My parents got like pretty sick just as like a freak coincidence. My dad was a little bit older than average, and so he started getting sick, and my mom started dealing with some like mental health stuff. I think kind of as a fallout from my dad's health stuff. And so suddenly, I'm drinking and using on a daily basis, and I'm dropping out of high school. And my parents, who were like really good people, really great parents, just weren't really able to be there to kind of gear me back on track. So, after I dropped out of high school, I very shortly after that, I moved away from, where my parents lived, moved to another city, just with a buddy of mine, an older buddy of mine, that had gone there to go to college. And so I moved up to Boston, age 16, and was just working like in warehouses and, excuse me, just working odd jobs without really any thought of the future. I mean, when you're 16 years old, and you're living out in the real world without, you know, anybody directing you, you're not really at least me, I should speak for myself. I had no thoughts that more than 1 year out. You know what I mean? There was no thinking, oh, what am I going to do as an adult? So I just kind of extended the party of my teenage years, until I got sober at like 24. So, yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I had a lot of fun. I know you guys all know, maybe not everybody, but I certainly had a lot of fun in, my teenage years. Partying is really what it was, as I was partying. And then by age like 18 or 19, the party was long over, and I was isolating, myself from my family, my friends, losing friendships all the time. not really able to, maintain any type of good romantic relationship, can't really hold a job down, starting to get physically dependent, on substances. And yeah, it was just pretty much downhill, pretty steady after age 18. And yeah, just like started getting really sick. I would try to like stop drinking sometimes and just end up like replacing that with drugs, and then would get in some trouble, get in a jam, and say, oh, it's got to be the drugs. I'll put those away and I'll just drink and smoke a little bit of weed, and then end up like physically dependent on alcohol. So just whatever it is, I'm kind of one of those people, like it's to the max no matter what it is. And I get hooked immediately, and nowadays it can be, different stuff, like in sobriety I can get hooked on, food, I can get hooked on the gym, I can get hooked on, other stuff that I'll keep low because my wife is in the next room, but I can get hooked, on pretty much anything. Um so I guess what happened was, uh age 24, I it really wasn't all that much of a, it wasn't my worst day, it wasn't my worst month really. I had started like in my last 4 to 6 years of drinking, I had started getting in legal trouble, and I had to do a couple, uh, couple stints in jail and prison. And I had just gotten out of a little bit in county jail, and things were actually looking somewhat up, but it was kind of the same thing I always did, where I had a plan, all right, I'm going to go to community college. I'm going to get back on my girl's good side. I'm going to, uh, drink just a little bit and maybe smoke a little bit of weed. It was always how to moderate, I mean, like the book talks about, like, it's the great obsession of every abnormal drinker that we will one day, control and enjoy our drinking. So, I absolutely pursued that obsession to the gates of insanity and death, and just always, there's got to be a way to spin this. Abstinence was never a thought, ever a thought, And then one day, for some reason, like shortly after I got out of jail, my girl was not really having this plan anymore, and she kind of broke up with me for good. And that was a big relationship. And I like was like, all right, whatever, I'm not gonna let that phase me. But I don't really know how to explain it. I like picked up the phone and I had this thought that I'm gonna try to go to rehab. And like, I know not everybody needs, rehab to get sober, but for me, I think that was just indicative of that seed of willingness. That was that jumping off place for me, where, I could no longer imagine life with or without alcohol, and that was like, to be between that rock and the hard place for me was really what it took for any type of change to happen, because I always had ideas about how I could spin everything, and I was finally out of ideas. And that was like a big moment of surrender for me. So what that looked like was, I called my mother, because she was the last person on earth probably who would talk to me. She's one of those moms who would have been right there next to me, like no matter what crazy stuff I was doing. And so I called her up and I said, I want to try to go to rehab. And I had been in like IOPs before. I've been court ordered to meetings and stuff like that, but I had never like walked into a rehab where they're going to take all my drugs and alcohol and lock me in this place. I had never willingly gone and done that. So I had little moments of sobriety, kind of, here and there, in the bullpen, waiting, on in jail and stuff like that, but never any like actual full abstinence. So when I had that for 30 days in rehab, that was like really cleared me up in a way that I had never experienced. And, pretty quickly I started feeling better physically. started feeling better mentally. And, they fed me a lot in there, and I hadn't eaten in probably years. I hadn't eaten right in years. So all of a sudden I'm eating, I'm sleeping, and they started bringing AA messages and, meetings into the rehab. And, I started listening, and trying to relate in. Uh, and, at first I kind of thought, well, I'll take some of this and leave the rest. That's kind of how I looked at it, like, cafeteria style AA, some people say. But, I think that's kind of how I had to do it at that point in time. I mean, it's kind of weird looking back. It's almost like, my higher power, God, whatever y'all's, beliefs are, was like giving me only what I could handle a little bit at a time. Nobody was forcing any belief system on me or anything. And so I just was thinking, like, look, if some of these speakers were anything like me and, they managed to put some sobriety together, then maybe I can do it too. I thought, yeah, maybe I can stay sober. I didn't think that I'd ever have any type of fun in life ever again. I thought, like, yeah, maybe I could stay sober for the rest of my life, but it's going to be a boring ass life. I didn't think I'd be able to get a good career, certainly not go to college. How does somebody go to college without drinking? Like I started getting this hope that maybe I could stay sober, but I was basically going to have to confine myself to a life that's boring and glum, like the book says. I didn't think that I'd be able to really experience that vigor of life sober. Now, for me, the most important thing for me to remember about that point in time is that even though I thought like maybe the rest of my life was going to be really lame, and slow, and I wasn't going to be able to do all these things because I was going to be crippled by cravings and triggers and all that. Even though I felt like that, it was still better than the place I was coming from. So in spite of this, apprehension that the rest of my life is going to be kind of lame, I still had that willingness to move forward with it because I just didn't want to go back. So what started as that little bit of willingness, that little bit of relating in, grew over the next 1 or 2 years of my sobriety. When I got out of rehab, I went to a different town than where I had been for like the last 6 years, which is another thing that I think was pretty vital for me, was changing people, places, and things. Now, that can get misconstrued sometimes as a geographical cure, but the difference here for me in my history is that there was rehab in between. It was like I went from point A to rehab where I was exposed to this whole new way of life, and then to point B. And I'm pretty sure that if I had gotten out of that rehab and tried to go back to that other place and hang with those same people and in those same places, I had tried that before. That's what would happen when I'd get out of jail. I'd go right back to the same friends, and I'd think, oh, I'll be able to control it around these people. And it's just my disease is too strong for all that, And so when I got out of rehab, I went to a new city where I still live now. I went to Baltimore, and immediately followed the suggestions that were given to me in rehab. I got a sponsor pretty quickly who was just some kid who I heard speak at my rehab. I didn't even really feel like we had that much in common. I just went for it and went to 90 meetings in 90 days, got a home group, got a job at my home group, and did all that. And the first 2 years of my sobriety were pretty smooth, actually. I know that's not a lot of people's experiences, but for whatever reason, that was mine. Like my first couple years of sobriety, my whole life was about going to meetings and going to work, just pay the bills and go and do AA, and I started sponsoring people, started doing commitments, and really caught on fire for AA. And I built a really strong foundation for those next couple years to follow, where all of a sudden my sort of pink cloud of like, just go to work and go to AA and be on fire and be grateful all the time for all these little things. I was still so close to my sobriety date at that point in time that the gratitude was so much more clear and real for me, and so yeah, the following 2 years or so after that, so into year 3, into year 4, all of a sudden all this real life stuff starts coming down the pipe at me. Like my mom, who had sort of gotten better from her illness, started getting real sick. And, that's when things, got real hairy for me in sobriety. So now all of a sudden I'm available to help with my family and all that type of stuff. So luckily, those first couple of years of sobriety, I built this really strong foundation, and I knew what to do when life got hard for me in sobriety. And that sponsor and all that step work that I really like pounded the pavement with in my first couple of years really started to come into play. And that was a few years ago. So here I am now, getting ready to celebrate 7 years here in about a week, and at my home group. And yeah, life has gotten really good, and not just the outside stuff. I mean, I'm so much stronger inside from the steps. I know how to deal with pain and fear. I know how to face my fears, which has really been my biggest thing in life. So I know how to face fear now, and as a result of all that, that inside job that the steps have done, I've been able to build a solid career, that's tough, and I don't love it, but it's good. And I'm doing school at night, trying to work on towards my degree. I'm 31 now. I got married last year to a girl who's also in the program. And we're getting ready to move into our first house here in a couple weeks. And yeah, so all that outside material stuff has finally come, but only because I really focused on AA and made that my top priority for a number of years. So I'm really grateful. It's really cool to see all you guys, and thanks, Tim, for asking me to speak.